Good morning, good afternoon, good evening. Ryan Engelstad here for the Thunderdome Network. And I was going to do a video on thrifting, why I thrift, why you thrift. And the thought came to me when I was thrifting on Thursday and found some gems from my childhood. But we'll start with why I thrift. We got into thrifting because we were buying things like this. When you could buy stuff when our trips to Africa, this was on the 75% off day. So this was $1.25 for all that thread. We do a sewing school, we have a woodworking school, and we have a kindergarten that we kind of supply over there, among other things. So sometimes the best, you can find whole bags of zippers, you can find whole bags of thread, and other things. And as long as you're careful when you're buying, you can usually do all right. And when you're buying a lot of stuff to take and you're paying to ship it over there, you don't want to pay top dollar necessarily for what you want. And often you can find stuff that is better quality, cheaper at thrift stores, because when they're bagging up stuff, they don't pay attention to who's making it necessarily on every item. I know they do on, like, the big items, the well-known names. But as far as, there is better thread, there is worse thread, there's better zippers, there's worse zippers. So sometimes you can do all right if you pay attention when you're shopping. Which is, of course, the big lesson for thrifting is pay attention to what you see and what you're buying. So that's what got us going into thrifting, was stuff like that. So now when we go and we do like our train show, I found this bag of miscellaneous whatnot. And I bought it just because this Spider-Man is the perfect scale for the old gauge train, and we could have him riding up on top of a train or in between cars or something, as like a little Easter egg for people to find when they come to the train show. But then there was also in that bag monsters that are about the right size. There's a headless horseman and Dracula, and I think this is a muscle. This seems like maybe he's too big. I thought at first he was a muscle man, like from when I was a kid, but he is. I think he's too big for that. I don't know. Whoever remembers Muscle Men was a big thing back in the 80s. So there's a few things in that bag that we can use, and I found a Toy Story bag of guys that we could also use also for the train show. So that's where that came from. And then, when I was still looking around, I found a whole bag of Battlestar Galactica. Let's see, so that's one of the starfighters. There were two of the Flying Wings. And another one of the Vipers. And they say 1978 on the bottom of them. And which is really cool. That's been around as long as I have, and still good shape. So when I decided I was going to buy that, because that whole bag of 4 ships was $2, I saw this other bag of miscellaneous people, and it had one of the pilots in it. Now, of course, you're not going to sit and look through every single bag at every single store to see what exactly is in every bag. But for whatever reason, he jumped out at the top of the bag. So then, of course, I figured, I had to buy this bag, which was $2, to get him. And then there was also, from G.I. Joe, I think this was Mutt, and the handler was Junkyard Dog, if I remember correctly. So we had to buy that. But then there was also all kinds of other things from my childhood that were in here. Anybody who remembers the little parachute men, these guys were sold for very cheaply. They had a little plastic parachute on them, and you threw them up in the air, and they came down, and they all had goofy faces and different bodies. And, yeah, those were a lot of fun. So the rest of those guys have to get processed and to see what we're going to keep and what we're going to throw. I also thought it was really interesting. I remember having these guys when I was a kid, too, that the males in outer space need the whole gear and helmet and mask, but the gal, is sitting there in no sleeves, mini skirt. Yeah, you gotta love the 80s. So Then moving on to what must have been someone else's whole collection. I remember having this as a kid. I had this very toy, and the Wolverine, and it came with CoverGirl, which was one of the few G.I. Joe females back in the 80s. And there was Scarlet, then there was CoverGirl, then there was Lady J, then I'm sure there was others after that. So to see that for $2, hit it all but one of the missiles, still had the removable engine bay. Yeah. That's, that'll go up on a shelf or, someplace cool because, like I said, that's just a great memory. I remember playing with that nonstop when I was a kid. My neighbor next door had one of these, and of course it's missing the engine covers, it's missing the missiles, but it still has the canopy, still has the front Gatling gun, and so this was the Rattler. And yeah, this was, another great memory. My neighbor next door, Chris, had this toy, and yeah, we'd play for hours and hours, running around with these G.I. Joe toys. The other thing we played with a lot when we were kids, which is kind of creepy now looking at them, was He-Man. I mean, we played for hours, and the same kid who had the Rattler had Castle Grayskull, and yeah, just looking at, all these guys that run around, full of muscles, wearing basically nothing, and yeah, so, yeah, these were a fun toy. We played, like I said, we played for hours and hours. They were also sold at the same time as all these guys. They had a sword that was plastic and ridiculous because it was so weak at the handle and the top was so heavy, and they sold them separately. Then you fit them together and you get one, so you needed two pieces to make one sword. My dad saw that and said, no, that's not good enough. And he traced it on a piece of plywood and cut it out with his saber saw, didn't sand it, didn't anything, gave it to us, and he goes, yeah, you can play with those. So a bunch of 10-year-old kids running around our backyard with these wooden swords, wailing on each other. Yeah, that's my childhood. But to get that much of the figures, which are, like I said, fairly old at this point, it was on half price day. So all those were for $2.50. So, and there was Man-at-Arms there. I forget what the blue guy was called, but his head could shoot up out of the body. That was $1.50. So, yep. And then this was more my brother's childhood, my two younger brothers, with these Ninja Turtles like this. This is one of the new ones. The front Leonardo guy is one of the newer ones, but the ones further back is the older style. Yeah, and they would sell as many of these as they could. They put them in different costumes and everything. Yeah, it was kind of fun. So, and then the last bag I have, I bought this bag of, so it was $1.50 just to get the Mater that's flying, like the Barnstormer there. And then when we buy these things like this, when you buy a grab bag like this, we take the parts that we want for either for the train or for Africa or for our just own fun. And then we'll take the rest of the pieces, bag them up, and either give them away at one of the Nerf events or the train events, or sell them, but or donate them back to Goodwill. We'll take what we want out of the bag and then bag up the rest and just put it right back and let someone else see if they have something they could use or something that reminds them of their childhood, and then they can buy it again, and round it goes. So that's why we thrift. That's how I thrift. And now it's on you. So if you have a different story or a different experience thrifting, go ahead and either put it in the comments or just make another video and keep another series going. So hope you guys all have a great day wherever you are, and we'll see you on the next one.